Okay, it's 5:30, so we'll call the first study session of 2018 to order. And the first order of business, I guess, will be roll call, Danny.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wales.
Here.
Are there any announcements, reports, or presentations?
Deputy Mayor, the only change is the moving engineering design standards to item 3C on the agenda.
Okay. Well, the first order of business is the selection of chairs for our special focus areas and ad hoc committees. And I guess we should open up the meeting here for anyone who has any particular preferences. I know that we already have a select group, and Rich is no longer with us, so we do have some absences. I have spoken to some of the council members regarding this, and I believe that if anybody would like to put forth any kind of nomination for themselves or their particular position that they would like on which focus area.
I'll start off. I would like to remain on the Municipal Services Committee as Vice Chair.
Do we have anyone that would like to become the actual chair of that focus area? We can have multiple representation on these focus areas.
Deputy Mayor, I had looked at municipal services as an area that I'd like to help with. And, if nobody else is going to step up as chair, I guess I could
be the chair then, Larry. Okay, thank you. So Larry and Bill will be the chair and vice chair of the municipal services. Health and Human Services, Yolanda.
I would like to remain the chair on this.
Vice Chair, Largo, would you consider?
I would consider it, but there might be somebody else that's interested.
Is there any other council member that would like to become Vice Chair of the Human Services, Health and Human Services? Hearing none, would you still consider that position? Thank you. Finance and Economic Development. John?
I'll step up to that.
Okay. And Larry, would you still consider the vice chair position for that?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Public Works and Community Development. Claude?
I'll take the chair on that. I was vice chair for Rich, so I'll take the chair.
Okay, thank you. Anyone for the vice chair of the Public Works and Community Development? I assume that I could assume one of those roles. May I? Okay. So I will be your vice chair. Okay. Takes care of that. First order of business is Resolution 5341, presentation of the formatted and edited adopted comprehensive plan. Yes.
You also need to identify your Finance Committee ad hoc members.
Yes. Which I am currently the chair of. Larry, would you consider getting involved in the Finance ad hoc committee at all?
Yes.
Okay. Would anyone like to be the vice chair of that?
Just keep it in finance.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. That's good. Okay.
Thank you. This is Jeff Dixon, Planning Services Manager, and I have with me tonight Alexandria Teague, Planner 2 with the Planning Services Division of the Community Development Department. And we wanted to speak to the City Council tonight about the formatted and edited and already adopted 2015 comprehensive plan. I want to make sure that all the council members received a copy of this in advance of tonight's meeting. Okay. So bear with me for a moment while I kind of run through briefly the history that got us to where we are today. So the comprehensive plan document, as the council is well aware, is the leading policy document that guides the city's evolution, growth, and development. It specifies the configuration, type, and intensity of land uses throughout the city, as well as the character and capacity of public facilities, and the basis for the city's adoption of all its development regulations, zoning, subdivision, critical areas. We were required under the Growth Management Act every 8 years to do a comprehensive review of that document and to ensure that it's consistent with Vision 2040 and the Growth Management Act requirements and the subsequent updates that have taken place. So we did that back starting in 2014. And the steps we followed back then was in 2014 we worked on a visioning process, the Imagine Auburn Visioning Initiative, and it was a year-long effort for outreach to the public and to garner participation in the formulation of the document and specifically its policies. Then during 2015, we conducted a series of 11 public meetings with the Planning Commission and culminating in 6 public hearings with the Planning Commission. Then on December 8th of 2015, the Planning Commission held their final public hearing and made a recommendation to the City Council. And then on December 14th of 2015, the City Council adopted the comprehensive plan by Ordinance 6584. Then after adoption of that plan, the city the ordinance itself recognized that staff's intention was to provide a professional formatting of the document. We gave it to you in kind of an unformatted version in terms of not having graphics or not having all the technical details to be able to refer to that. So the intention with the adoption of that ordinance was that we would follow through and format that document, make sure the index works, page numbering, the whole nomenclature that goes with that document. So in early 2016, staff began to search for a professional editor with that kind of capabilities to review the adopted plan and make recommendations for improving the document's readability, grammar, and voice. In mid-2016, we selected an editor that had that technical experience in policy writing, and the editor we chose also had the ability to assist us with formatting, which was a great benefit. So staff intended to reformat the document after editing was complete, and finding an editor that had these capabilities helped us with that step as well. The editing process took approximately 6 months as we went back and forth with the editor on review of the document, and included numerous exchanges about the language in order to answer questions and perfect the document. This formatting process took approximately 6 months. Well, it included evaluating color options and format, and evaluating hundreds of options about color choices, fonts, layouts, organizing graphics to go with it, and now the document actually looks quite different than the document that was initially shared at the time of adoption of the ordinance. And also part of the effort in organizing it using particular electronic software and put a particular format was to make the document available in different kinds of formats. So I'd like to show you what kind of format we're intending to make available on the city's website as well. So if you can bear with me a minute while this loads. We want to make part of the intent was to make a document that was more user-friendly. That's why we concentrated on having a core plan that could be the easy reference document. But we also wanted to make the document more accessible on the city's website and make it more user-friendly. So one of the formats that we're intending to load to the city's website is this flipbook format. And as you can see, it makes the document easy for people to understand in terms of how it is, and it'd be easy to find things in this document. So this, you may be familiar with this for the Auburn magazine. It's a similar format that we use, that's used for that document. I wanted to touch upon some of the highlights in terms of some of the technical kinds of just get it with this one. Some of the kinds of changes that we did with the editor of particular concern. We did, of course, typographical and grammatical kinds of improvements to the document to make it more clear and easier to read. We also revised the map that's part of the document. It needed to be run by different software to support that and make that in a user-friendly format. So we cleaned up some of the line work and made sure that that document was easier to read. We also moved some of the documents that were standalone to an appendices, the transportation plan, since that's an element that is kind of separate and originated by the Public Works Department. That document was moved to the appendices, as well as we had some appendices that were very many of the supporting documents that were used to originate the plan. That was also moved to an appendices. Other kinds of changes included some text changes basically to the land use element and specifically to the designated areas or sub-areas of the plan. There were 7 different types of those, and we clarified the language between the plan and the maps to make sure that those agreed and that they were consistent. Some of those carried some information from the pre-2015 plan forward so that they agreed in terms of the designation of those special area plans and those designated areas. So we made sure that there was not duplication between the contents of the plan and the appendices by pulling only certain elements forward into the plan and having it refer back to the appendices for the full context of the adopted sub-area plans. So the action we're requesting is a ratification of Resolution 5341, which we believe does not materially change the contents of the plan, but improves it in terms of the clarity and readability. And we did present these changes to the Planning Commission at their regular meeting on September 19th as well, and reviewed the changes with the Planning Commission, and they were appreciative of the changes and had no concern with the changes that were made to formalize this document. So we're proposing that this ordinance be reaffirmed at prior adoption of the comprehensive plan. And I also wanted to point out that the City Council recently adopted Ordinance 6667, which was some annual comprehensive plan amendments, and those have yet to be been reflected in this document yet. So the Council will receive a subsequent submittal to change out some pages to correspond with that action. So I'm available to answer any questions.
Councilmember Corsi.
I have a few questions, if that's okay. Turn to page 19 of 176 in our packet. C1-2. Item number 11 at the bottom of the page, and continuing on at the top of page 20. So it talks about a sentiment in Auburn to be safer. It says we need to overcome this perception. Somehow or those words don't really come together very well. So I think if we're safe, we're safe. If we're not, we're not.
Right.
And I think our police department does a wonderful job and does the best they can with the resources they have, but I think we need to rethink that.
Well, it is referring, of course, to a perception that, you know, may or not have validity or may only be shared by part of the population.
Well, when I hear the word perception, it, to me, raises a concern because it says that the community has a perception, but we got to change that perception. So I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay. So I understand and can understand how we would affect some changes. Is it that a perception that, is it a problem that it's perception expressed by a majority of the population, since that seems to be kind of the context for the wording?
I couldn't say whether or not a majority of the population, would express that. I think we just need to either take out the word perception or change it to a different word that
Okay.
allows us to improve safety in the community.
Okay.
Or continuously look at improving safety in the community.
I would propose that we could docket that for a subsequent amendment in future years.
Councilmember Pelosi?
He took care of it.
Did he?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Councilmember,
I'm glad that Claude caught that, because I also circled it, because either we're safe or we're not. And that was my thought too when I read it, so thank you for looking into it.
Councilmember Holman?
To me, when I read it, it says that if you have a fear for your safety, but it's merely perceived and it's not based in fact, then it states that, I don't know, I don't have any trouble with the language. It's a perception. People perceive that they are less safe than they actually are.
Oftentimes, perception is reality, though.
Well, most definitely, if you're perceived one way, even though you're not, it's your perception that you're living with. And it's not that we should be working, but to always strive to be better. I have no problem with that. But
Councilmember Troutman?
And that is what, hearing from the constituents out there, a lot of them are fear, fear. You hear it all the time in those neighborhood web pages, we got broken into, we got our car stolen, our truck stolen. They broke into a home when somebody was in the home, so the perspective, it is out there, the fear is out there. So it's either we are safe, or we're working to be safer, or, we're not safe.
Take a look at the semantics in there and just see if we get the right words, and then run it up with flagpole again one more time.
moving on, this document is in response to Vision 2040. We are already beginning to work at PSRC on Vision 2050. The update is upon us. How easy will it be to change items in this to comply with Vision 2050 when that comes to fruition in less than 2 years now?
Well, as the council knows from the annual comprehensive plan amendment, we seek to identify those things and make housekeeping kind of changes each year. So if there's something that comes out of that effort that needs to be reflected in our comprehensive plan, we are limited to only changing the document once a year, but we can, if we have sufficient notice, roll that into the process of our annual amendments.
I was follow on, Chair. More concerned about we're moving quite heavily towards the electronic method. And so I assume the format we've chosen is easily editable, and easy to update.
Yes, it will be.
On page 29 of 176, under buildable land analysis, the couple things. One is the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has looked at a study to go through the process of the the issue of lack of buildable lands in the region, and has encouraged the governor to put that in as a priority for his agenda, which I believe he's thinking about doing. So just a comment there. If I look at on the paragraph below the King County Buildable Lands, the second paragraph, it ends with, this estimate shows a capacity of approximately 14,597 housing units in the King County portion through in the city through 2031. If we turn to page 32, and look at table 8, I didn't have any other figures, so I used the 2010 estimate. If I add the 14,597 units to the 2010 number of housing units, the total becomes 42,424 versus the projection of 37,276. So I'm not quite sure which one it is.
And I don't know without researching the origin of those. Which
Absolutely, I
one
understand that, absolutely. So I think I'm encouraged to see that, almost 15,000 housing units are projected. I know we do have issues with buildable lands, and that's part of redevelopment as well, but it's at least encouraging to see that we're potentially able to put that in housing units in the city. That's all I have.
Any other questions for the group here? Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have one item here that came up from the bottom part. I believe we're going to have some representatives here for the design standards update.
Hello, Council. My name is Jacob Sweeting, Assistant City Engineer. And this is James Witt, your Traffic Engineer. And we are here tonight to present to you updates to the engineering, design, and construction standards that are proposed to be published later this month or soon thereafter. We're going to run through a quick presentation. I encourage you to ask questions as we go. That way we can move through this and address any concerns you might have. So the reason we're here is that the city code grants the authority to the city engineer to publish and update design and engineering construction standards that dictate and standardize what gets built and how it gets built in the city's public right-of-way. And for most of the changes that we make, they're made administratively, and they are minor technical updates, usually of a technical basis to incorporate new standards or regulations, new technologies that come on board. But the city code does say that anytime we have updates that may have broad citywide implications or policy matters involved, we need to come and consult with you. And that's why we're here tonight, to talk about some of those issues. So the topics for the updates that we're going to discuss with you tonight are development plan requirements. So the standards do cover both capital projects and private development projects. And in the standards, we have specific requirements for developers when they're preparing their plans and how they're submitted and what's included. So there's some changes coming to those that we're proposing. And there are also some transportation requirements that we'll talk about here, and they're listed here as well. But we'll get in more detail in 1 second. Let me start first with talking about development plan requirements. So one of the things that we've seen recently in a lot of the larger projects that are happening in downtown and elsewhere throughout the city is that these projects, the developers want to phase those projects. currently in our standards, we don't have any type of requirements for how the phased proposals work, what needs to be submitted, what the requirements are. So really, we've been doing it, making it up as we go. The developer comes in, they have a phasing plan, a phasing idea, and we work with them on it. And it usually turns out quite successful. But what we want to do is try to be more consistent and actually provide something to the developers in advance in our standards so that they can follow those and know if they want to phase a project, what they'd actually have to submit to us. So the standard that we're proposing is that their plans will show us all the public improvements that they're going to complete prior to occupancy, which usually, in most cases, is all the public improvements. Usually the phasing itself involves the private improvements, building 1, building 2, or housing block 20 through 30, while the public improvements are almost always built as part of the first phase. And then provide us with a narrative showing how the different phases are going to connect with each other, what's not going to be in phase 1 versus phase 2 versus phase 3, with the idea that if at some point they get stalled or phase 2 or 3 doesn't happen, we're not left with something that is a hindrance to the public and something that the city would be left with maintenance and possibly other issues involved with. Any questions about the phasing plans? Yes.
Yeah, I like that strategy, but instead of most often, all the time. Because if a project does get stalled, we're left with when, then it's sold or whatever, and we're left with the spoils of what was not completed. So I'd like you to spend some time discussing, always requiring it so that it looks decent if it has to be abandoned.
And I think that's a good point. As far as the public improvements, we actually do always require them to be built. And if there's any pieces that aren't, we get a bond for it.
Okay.
So if for some reason it is stalled and we need to call in the bond, we will complete those public improvements.
So
It'd be things like the final lift of asphalt on pavement,
Okay.
or street trees that you don't want to put in the middle of summertime versus the wintertime. You know, it's those type of things. But I agree with that.
Okay,
It's a good point.
thank you.
Any other questions on the phasing plans? So another aspect of the development plans is the data itself. As you probably know, we have a great GIS system here. We have all sorts of facilities and assets that are recorded in GIS. Our Maintenance and Operations Division actually utilizes GIS to go out and keep track of what needs to be maintained, when it's being maintained. But the most important thing about that is making sure our assets are actually there in GIS. And we proposed to include with our development plans actually a CAD standard, which is a computer-aided drafting, where they actually create their plans in a way that allows us to move from that electronic world, as we see through this chart here. You have the electronic CAD drawings, then you go to the actual the plans, you go out to construction, you build it, you come back, you have your updated as-built drawings, but they also then give us updated CAD files. If we have those updated computer-aided drafting files, we can import those into GIS more easily and get to that finished database that we need to be able to maintain that infrastructure more efficiently. So there's other agencies that do it. It shouldn't be something that creates any type of hardship. It's just a matter of having that standard and putting it out there and asking them to follow it.
Councilmember Pelosi.
So, what kind of problems have you had from your experience doing it the way we're doing it now?
You know, we've experienced a lot of growth. There's a lot of projects happening, and I wouldn't say it's a problem, but I say we need to find ways to be more efficient. We need to find ways to get that information into our database more efficiently, more quickly, so we don't come back and say, okay, you know, we have 20 projects that we need to get into GIS before we can start maintaining it. We have 2 people doing it. It's going to take us 6 months. I'm not going to come back and ask for more people. I'm going to come back and tell you a more efficient way to make that happen, and this is one way to do it.
Councilmember.
That kind of gets back to what Councilmember Holman was speaking to as it comes to the update of the comprehensive plan. If we get it in a format that we can update quickly, it's a better use of our time than spending time on clerical people or whatever entering data. So I think that sounds really, you give them the template for a good strategy.
Nothing worse than starting a design or as a construction project and then find out that the as-built that you had from the time before are wrong. So it's important to get those in up front as soon as possible.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to James, and he'll talk a little bit about some of the transportation requirements that we're
Okay.
proposing.
So the first change to the standards that I want to talk about is changing our clear zone lateral offset standard. This first slide talks about what the clear zone is. It's basically the area to the side of the road that has no fixed objects in it. So if you lose control, you have the opportunity to not hit anything, regain control, and get back on the road without having a crash. Clear zone is typically utilized on more rural highways, freeways, and interstates, so higher speed facilities. The requirement is based on the speed that the facility is posted at, how much traffic uses the road, and then if there are grades or curves along the roadway. In some circumstances on very high speed facilities, this can be as much as 50 feet. So either side of that traveled way, you'd have 50 feet clear, so that if you're doing 70 miles an hour, you can have a little whoop-de-doo off the side and get back on without anything bad happening.
Love those technical terms.
Those are kind we can understand.
Now, this is great for those high-speed facilities where there's lots of space along them and you can fit an extra 100 feet in on either side or combined on the roadway. Obviously, we're more urban. We have a built environment. So for the majority of our facilities, we look at a lateral offset, which is a smaller distance because we have curb and gutter and sidewalk in a lot of circumstances, because we have limited right-of-way before you have buildings. We use a lateral offset. Lateral offset is really the distance, it's the shy distance. So if you're driving along the roadway, it's the distance to the side of your vehicle that you're clear of those fixed objects without hitting anything. It's typically a minimum of 2 feet because obviously you have a mirror sticking out from the side of your vehicle, you have a dually, you have that extra width on the back, and it can be up to 6 feet is the preference. Some statistics of the benefits of having this lateral offset. Research has shown that about 80% of collisions with roadside objects happen when they're located within 4 feet of that curb line, with about 90% occurring when the object's located within 6 feet of that curb line. So our current standard, we have 2 feet now for our lateral clearance. So we have utility poles, other fixed objects located within 2 feet of the face of curb. On those roadways where we don't have curb and gutter, we do follow the requirements for clear zone. Because we have lower speeds and lower volumes, that typically gets up to be about in the 10-foot range, can be a little bit more depending. What we're proposing is for that urban environment where we have curb and gutter and sidewalk, we would increase our lateral offset from the 2-foot standard now to a minimum of 4 feet from the face of curb. And then on the outside of a curve, we would increase that to 6 feet to give some additional separation. For non-urban facilities, so those kind of more rural, I don't want to say rural, more rustic type facilities that we have, we would continue to use the clear zone requirements set forth by AASHTO.
Councilmember?
Where are you planning on starting this, or are we already doing this?
We're already, so for those rustic facilities, we already try and follow AASHTO. And we are already doing the 2-foot minimum for lateral offset. The changes would go into effect when these new standards are adopted by are they adopted by council?
No.
No. Okay.
When they're actually published,
Okay.
they become effective. And, you know, it's not going to be overnight all of our utility poles are moved back. It's going to be as utility poles are relocated or replaced for various reasons. We'll work with the companies that own them to get them moved back as we can.
Or
It just simply is not feasible to try to go out there and move them all. There's too many.
or as new development projects come in for review and approval, we'll consider these new standards as part of those new projects.
So it's what you did up on Highway 164. I see that you've done some that allow people or even the buses to move over. Is that some of the what you have done? Or is that not what you're talking
Are you
about?
talking about kind of down in front of the casino where there are the bus?
Yeah.
No, that's just a bus pull-out. That's just to get the bus, when it stops, to let people on and off, not blocking that through traffic on Auburn Way
So
South.
those are strictly just for the buses.
Yes, and to accommodate youth in some locations as well. But that's not,
What you were talking about.
yeah,
Okay.
not related to
That-
this, yeah.
But to speak to that project, there are utility poles that have been set back behind the sidewalk there as part of that project.
Not
Trying to move them back, recognizing that, you know, more separation is better.
Councilmember Wales?
I can understand moving the utility poles and those types of things, because when cars hit those, it's like it divides the cars in half and anything that's in its way. My concern about some of the other standards, especially in residential areas, is that it's gonna use up a lot of land in already small building sites. Have you looked at the impact of this issue of buildable lands and the size of lots that we have looked at from other points of view? And also, because I only get one time, is I'm dealing with an issue like this up at Lakeland tomorrow, where there's this public land, and they didn't put in or the plants that were put in, they took the plants out because there was no irrigation, and they put in gravel, and now we're told that that is not safe. So what is this really going to do in our neighborhoods? Though I do support the utility and the other poles.
So for lot sizes and buildable land, this shouldn't have any effect on that. For the urban environment, we typically have 10 feet of right-of-way behind the curb.
Okay.
So any changes that result from increasing this from 2 feet to 4 feet or 6 feet would still all occur within that right-of-way without having any impact on the adjacent private property.
Can you tell me how gravel is more dangerous than small shrubs that are dead?
So I believe that it is actually prohibited in city code that gravel, rock, bark can be placed within the right-of-way. And the concerns with that are the fact that it's not fixed in place, so it tends to move around, gets on the sidewalk, creates a tripping hazard, gets into the storm drain system and plugs things up, and can be used as a projectile by certain individuals.
So like on our right-of-way that's under the railroad tracks on Auburn Way South, where we've got those large, are those concreted in place and stuff so that they can't be used as a dangerous object?
I don't know. I
But
can't.
if the rocks were concreted in place where they couldn't be a flying hazard, that might be a solution? Something to think about.
Yeah.
And actually, if I could add on to that, your comment about the irrigation, we've heard that comment, and we know there's a need and a desire for certain residential areas to have some irrigation opportunities in the public right-of-way, in the landscape strips to help them maintain it. We will be coming back in the next month or so with a proposed code change that would help it make it easier for those types of properties to put irrigation in the right-of-way. They can right now, but they have to get a right-of-way use permit.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more difficult than just going out and building it. You have to actually insure it and maintain it.
Yeah.
We'll come back in the next month or so with some ideas on how we might be able to help them.
Okay, great, thank you.
Gentlemen, if we apply the 4 feet to 6 feet proposed standard, you go across Porter Bridge and you're going up the hill. The telephone poles, you get banged up about every week, as you know. So how would something like, how would a standard like this apply? They just wiped out a telephone pole on the corner of 104th there at the traffic light, as you guys know. And that was right near the sidewalk, that pole. And they planted another pole right behind it, so we've got a mixed bag here, I think.
It's going to be a slow process. Our opportunity to have utility companies relocate those poles is when they come in for they're doing work and they're required to get a permit from us, and we'll review the work that they're doing, be it replacing existing poles with new ones, adding poles, doing other sorts of work. We can then review those plans and put those requirements back to them that as part of the work they're doing, they then have to relocate the poles to be further away. I suspect that was an emergency repair.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that moving things around from a utility standpoint tends to have slightly further reaching impacts because everything has to line up and the forces have to work with the poles. So if they start moving one, it potentially has impacts on the
Well, then the
adjacent ones as
curve,
well.
it makes it difficult because of the curve right there also.
Just a reminder, if any of you on council are receiving concerns or complaints about designs or anything like the right-of-way or those areas, you need to forward those concerns to staff to deal with. They are the ones that are the professionals in this area, and it's greatly appreciated, of course, when you are approached about something like this, but just a reminder that the proper action is to forward that information to staff for them to deal with.
Any other questions in this area? And I guess with black ice, all bets are off. Right?
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
So the next design standard proposed change relates to clarifying when, if there is work out in the roadway, that work would trigger some sort of upgrade to curb ramps or ADA ramps that it crosses. Right now, there's no standard in place that actually determines how it's handled, except for what we have guidance from FHWA, which doesn't really speak to a utility trench across a crosswalk. So we'd like to be consistent. We'd like to have something that everyone knows what to expect when they come and they trench in the public right-of-way, how they're going to have to restore it, and if they're going to have to upgrade or install sometimes curb ramps on the crosswalk they may be intercepting. So if you look at the picture here, what we've come up with is the crosswalk length shown here. So here would be a typical trench. A company comes along, or maybe it's a city coming along and putting in or replacing a water line. In this case, the trench replacement and the patch itself is shown in the orange, and you can see it doesn't cross more than half the length of that crosswalk. Here, on the other hand, it's a deeper trench. Maybe there's multiple utilities. We have a restoration area that either equals or exceeds the length of that crosswalk. This is the scenario which we're proposing the adjacent curb ramps would need to be looked at. If the adjacent ramps that service that crosswalk that are being impacted, if they don't meet current ADA standards or they aren't in place at all, whoever's doing that restoration work would be responsible for upgrading those ramps. Many times it's going to be the city. We already do that anyways with our projects. When we cross it, we're impacting the crosswalk, we upgrade the ramps. But we have lots of areas out there where it's a gray area. You know, it's not well defined right now what that trigger is, and this is the trigger that we're proposing. It's something that would be backed by WashDOT and FHWA from the standpoint of meeting the ADA requirements, and we think it'd be a good standard to follow.
How does that apply to roundabouts, like on High Street and 22nd?
So the standard would be the same. It would be just the total length of the crossing and how it's impacted. Now, that specifically, so if you have a median in the middle, right? You know, do you measure all the way across the road or just the median? Probably something we need to sort out a little bit more.
The good news is that being new construction, all those ramps will meet ADA, so wouldn't need to be upgraded.
Councilmember Wales.
But if it's just a small developer that maybe is just putting in 2 houses at the end of something or another, what would be the likelihood? I mean, they couldn't be putting in something that's that wide. I worry about fill-in development and the costs to those people who are just doing 1 or 2 units. What is the likelihood that they would have to have that huge, wide trench?
You know, it's going to be more likely when you have larger plats and larger developments, because this size of trench, you're looking at more so of a large sewer extension or a water main extension that is needed to service that larger development. I won't say it won't negate every case, because it could be out there. So I don't know.
So would we be able to let our staff have some wiggle room to make some professional decisions as to whether they're going to do this or not?
So the argument in this case, the process would be whoever's developing this, doing this work would have to ask for a deviation from the standard, and then that'd be reviewed and considered by the city engineer.
Okay.
And then there is some process that if that decision wants to be disputed, then there's a further process that can be followed.
As long as there's a process. Thank you.
Any other questions in this area?
Okay.
I think this is going to be the last one.
This is the third and final one for this evening, anyway. Street trees and grades. Currently, our design standards require a 10-foot sidewalk with street trees and grades on principal arterials, minor arterials, and non-residential collector streets. Residential collector streets and local residential streets, we have a 5-foot sidewalk in the landscaping strip, and there are trees located in the landscaping strip. Current city code requires that the adjacent property owner is responsible for maintaining the tree and the area under the grate that the tree is planted in. The city looks after the tree grate itself. The issues that we're seeing are that because these are located along commercial streets and in front of commercial development, there's a lack of ownership and a lack of maintenance that is being done by those adjacent property owners. You want to flip forwards to the next slide. So this shows some pictures of some of the issues that we're seeing. The photo on the left is on the A-B corridor north of downtown, as is the middle one. And then the one on the right is in front of the King County Library on Auburn Way South. You can see the vegetation that's growing up through the holes in the grates. It's creating some potential tripping issues. It's unsightly. And long-term, there's the potential that as this rogue vegetation continues to grow and expand, that there's the potential for it to cause some damage to the grate or to the sidewalk around it itself. There's also, kind of tying this back to the previous item, trees, when they reach a certain diameter, become considered to be a fixed object. So by having higher speeds on our principal and minor arterials and locating these trees in that lateral offset, we're creating some potential clear zone or lateral offset issues and some safety issues associated with that. So the proposed change to the design standard is on those arterial and commercial streets to remove the requirement to install street trees and grates. The duck zone would be excluded from that because the majority of the streets in the duck are lower speed streets just because of the nature of downtown. What else was I going to say? One of the other things is the planning code's requirements for landscaping for those commercial businesses. There's always landscaping located behind the sidewalk. So with kind of the landscaping on the backside, there's also some competition between the street trees and the landscaping that's put in by those businesses. So it's not necessarily creating the environment that we were looking for. And the businesses do a much better job of maintaining the landscaping and the trees that are located on their own property behind the right-of-way, behind the sidewalk. So that's kind of the background behind that and what we would propose.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Do we have trees and grates outside of the duck?
We do have trees and
We
grates.
do?
We do. So the one on the right is on Auburn Way South in front of King County's library, and there are also newer ones that have been recently installed in front of the Let's Go.
And those were installed by the developer?
The ones on the left were installed by the city because that was a city project. The one on the right, I would assume, was installed by King County as part of the library project. The ones to the south of that were installed by the city as part of the frontage improvements that were done as part of the park improvements.
No, the post office has some.
Post office is in the,
It's part of
yeah.
center one.
So
The one on the left
yeah.
would be the post office?
Yeah. Other locations we have them are on Auburn Way North, in front of FedEx, so just north of 37th Street. And Auburn Way South, they're being installed in front of the casino, and they were included with CP 1118, 1218, so kind of that dogwood hemlock area. They all have street trees and grates. There are probably other locations as well, but those are the ones I can think of on the spot.
Councilmember Wales.
Yeah, I like this idea a lot because it decreases some hazards too. Leaves accumulating, and that's not where we necessarily want all our beauty. And if the people that have the businesses and put the plants and the beautiful stuff on their property that they remember is their property, because these agreements are kind of like, my daughter, you can clean up your room and I'll do this kind of a thing, and they forget. So I think that this is a really great maintenance future idea.
Councilmember Pelosi.
It would be interesting to see a little map when you put this into a code change that shows the duck and then show how those that are outside the duck.
Councilmember Holton.
Yeah, I think the key to this is industrial and commercial zones. So just look at a zoning map of Auburn and you can see all the areas where we would no longer require trees and grates.
We could show fairly easily on a map where we have the arterial streets and those non-residential streets to be able to highlight that for you.
Any questions in this area? Councilmember Wales.
I think that this is also a plus for our developers and builders too. Let's put the stuff that we need to maintain in places where people can enjoy it and not use it where there's not a lot of traffic. Also, by doing this, we create some walking trails within the city where people can, do speed walking and some other things without some of these other hazards. So it's a great idea.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Is there anybody here on the council that would require a copy of that information?
It's so well.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, at this part of the meeting, we will turn over the chair to the focus area chair of the municipal services area, and that would be Councilmember Pelosi.
Okay. Item 4A, Airport Advisory Board 2018 Annual Work Plan. And here they come, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum.
The boys.
Thank you, Council. Yep. The Airport Board always enjoys an opportunity to come here once or twice a year to tell you what the heck we're doing over there. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the annual work plan for the Airport Board.
And you're John Tyson.
I am John Tyson.
Person of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair of the Year.
Person of
The Auburn Reporter Person of the Year.
Person of the Year.
That's right.
Wow.
Boy.
That was a great honor, but it was great exposure for Orion, obviously. I was saying that we got over 4,000 hits on LinkedIn, because of that article. And 5 years ago, if you told me I'd be sitting here talking about hits on LinkedIn, I'd go, huh? Okay, so you all know that last year the board did our first strategic plan, and that strategic plan was meant to support the work of the board that we have to do to support the airport master plan. And so this year we have done our annual work plan, and that is a list of key actionable items meant to support the strategic plan and the airport master plan. So does the council have copies of this list? Okay. So we have really 6 key things that we're going to focus on this year. First is that the board will work with city council and city staff on a continued phase in and rollout of the Jet A fuel program. And this is a key strategy. It'll work, with some creative agreements between Airport Management Group, Cascade Helicopter, and the city, and it allows us really a test program to bring Jet A to the airport. And if we see sufficient volume, then we've got strategies that we can look at for a longer-term program with Jet A. That strategy really goes hand in hand with the second item, and that is the board to work with the city council and city staff on continued progression of the design and construction phases of the runway enhancement project. And you all know from the master plan that runway enhancement project is intended to allow us to bring more diverse and larger aircraft onto the airport, and many of those require Jet A fuel. So those first 2 items really are necessary to go together. The third item, board to work with city council, planning commission, city staff, and interested parties on examination of possible implementation of land use strategies for the airport and surrounding properties to support and enhance airport-related safety and the airport's economic development contribution to the community. We've talked before that we know that the airport is a unique asset for the city, and you'll see an item farther down that references that we've really got 2 developable parcels on the airport. And so the airport right now is at nearly 100% occupancy. And so we've got this unique asset that is nearly full, and so we believe there's opportunities and should be opportunities to expand the use of that asset. And so this item looks at off-airport properties that we could utilize in addition to the on-airport properties. The fourth item, board to work with city council and city staff on evaluating potential actions and financing strategies resulting from the findings of the facilities condition assessment report. And that's scheduled for completion this month. So we have a group that's doing the assessment of the airport facility. We've had some issues, I'm sure you're aware, with gates, beams, doors, and fencing over the last year at the airport. It is an old airport, so we need to do an assessment of what the capital needs are for the airport and take a look at how we might make some investment to bring that up to standard. Fifth item, board to work with City Council and City staff on a strategic action plan for the implementation of recommendations of the competitive market assessment and long-term rate study, currently scheduled for completion in fall of 2018. So you know that has started, that has begun, and that's meant to take a look at not only our local market, but our regional market and the national market, and allow us to assess really what it is we have here. I mentioned that we're at 100% occupancy. We also know that there's great demand for a facility at Boeing Field and at Renton Airport, so we've talked before that everything's moving south. And so we believe that this is important to take a look at what the market tells us the opportunity is for the airport and allow us to make better decisions for use of that asset. Number 6, based on the recommendations of the, did I just do that one? No. Okay. Based on the recommendation of the competitive market assessment and long-term rate study currently scheduled, board to work with city staff to develop marketing and development strategies for the 2 current approved on-airport development sites. So these are the 2 sites on airport. We are already marketing those sites, but we need to understand what the market demand is to give us a better idea of what the opportunities are there. And so that really is what we've identified as our key objectives for the year. Be happy to entertain any questions anybody might have about those.
Member Brown.
Yes, on the, as far as the opportunity for development, what is the Airport Advisory Board looking at as far as types of development? I mean, are the aviation-oriented development, is it exclusive to that, or are we trying to retain that?
Everything that we've considered so far, and it's most likely everything that we would pursue in the future, and I'll let Jamel respond to this as well, would be aviation-oriented.
Yeah, the first priority we would look at would be aeronautical use. That has the highest ranking. That means that a business would have to have a runway, taxiway for them to be able to do business. The next level down would be aviation activity, which doesn't have to have a taxiway or runway, but it's aviation oriented. Could be an instrument shop, something like that, where the parts could come in. Then non-aeronautical is the very lowest and would only be on a temporary basis.
I could add this very quickly. The airport has an approved airport master plan by the Federal Aviation Administration that has a section of that addresses development. So anything that we do out there also has to be consistent with that airport master plan in order to stay in compliance with the FAA.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. We'll go into the next.
Bill, I would like to see us, if it's okay with Larry, that on our topics for municipal services, that we add for future agendas, the facilities assessment report, which may be done in February or March, and also in February, March, a capital needs for the airport report.
So I could respond real fast, Councilmember.
Yeah, go ahead.
The intent with the facilities condition assessment is to actually go through a review both with the Airport Advisory Board and the City Council.
Yeah.
We're hoping that we will have that wrapped up by the end of this month. And then at that point, we'll start the conversations with the Airport Advisory Board, get their input, and then we'll bring it to Council.
Great, so if we could get that on the agenda so we remember it,
Sure.
not date specific, but just so we don't lose it. That would be most helpful.
So when we get to that part of the agenda,
You want me to bring it up at the end?
absolutely.
Got it.
And if I could also add.
Add it, yeah.
I was just going to add, as part of the capital request, that we are initiating the 2019-20 budget process, and as part of that, we do look at the capital facilities plan, and the airport is part of that.
Yes.
So the council will have the opportunity to review proposals for the future capital facility needs of the airport as part of that process.
Okay, great.
Okay, you're generally going to be there for the next topic, correct?
Yes.
Ordinance 6663. This is the change in the airport board membership.
And I will give a very brief overview, and I'm going to turn it over to the chair. All these items tonight come out of the strategic business plan that the council adopted. And one of the action items in that business plan was for the board to periodically review its composition, and that ranged not only from the topics it might review based on council needs and desires for the Airport Advisory Board's work, but also the membership. And right now, the current allowable membership at the Airport Advisory Board is 5 members. And we've experienced a couple times some quorum issues. The board has also recognized that we may have some need for additional skills and experiences. So that's what brought this forward, and I'll turn it over to the chair to continue to talk about how we went from 5 to 7 and why that may be good for the benefit of the board.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So it requires, with a 5-member board, it requires 3 for a quorum. And it's not hard to imagine that there might be times when you might have 3 people absent, unique, but could happen and has happened. So just in terms of quorum, it makes sense. But despite the fact that we've got a really good board right now, and probably the best board that we've had in the 5 years that I've been there, we think that there's an opportunity, if we increase by 2, to take a look at some skill areas that Kevin just referenced, and add to the, I guess, the experience level of the board. What's cool about the board right now is we've got, pilots on the board. We've got non-pilots. We have people that own businesses. We have people that own businesses adjacent to the airport. We have somebody that works for Boeing, and their particular expertise is working with the FAA. So, we've got a nice variety, but I think that there's an opportunity to expand, the skill that we have on the board. Stronger the board, better decisions we'll make. So those are the really 2 driving reasons. We would like to say, though, that even though the board, can help, recruit new board members, that it really is the mayor who, would, I think, identify potential candidates. And, we would just suggest that we've got such a great culture on the board right now that we want to be really careful in how we select board members, and make sure that we have a strong fit, and a lot of teamwork with board members. So anyway, that's the background.
For the benefit of the council, when we went through our previous recruitment process, we did involve both John as chairperson and Gary Gustafson as vice chair in that interview process, and I think that helped immensely in getting a good perspective so that we can make recommendations to the mayor subject to your confirmation to get some really excellent candidates.
Largo. Council member, Largo Wales.
With 5, your quorum is 3, and with 7, your quorum is 4. That's not much difference. I just wanted to point that out. The next thing I wanted to point out is I'd like to see us possibly give consideration to maybe a representative from the Civil Air Patrol volunteer group. Okay.
Any other questions, everybody? None? Okay, stay seated. We're going to talk about the airport user survey.
So one of the work tasks that we had was to survey the current users. And when we identified the users, we looked at the people that are based there, that are tenants of the cities, meaning they pay rent directly to the city, or also the condominium associations that rent land and have private development, private hangars owned by numerous individuals. And it also included the people that have been visiting the aircraft or visited often, so we were able to track that. We sent out 457 surveys, and we received 138 responses back, which is about a 30% return. So we felt pretty good on that. Some people did not complete the entire survey, but they said the others, those were the ones I was interested in, so I just skipped it. We purposely made it so that they could complete it within 2 minutes, because I know when I get a survey and it keeps going and going and going, I quit. Okay, so I really left it to just 10 questions. And the rate, even though the graph on this goes out to 10, our top rating was 5. So it'll be 0 being not so good or very dissatisfied in some instances, 5 being very satisfied. So when you see it just halfway, that doesn't mean that's halfway. It means 5 is the top, okay? So the very first question that we had is, what was the primary reason you chose Auburn Airport as your home base? Obviously, we've always known this, but location was number 1 by showing in excess of 101 responses. The next one shows that it being a non-towered airport, meaning we do not have an FAA facility with a control tower and a controller up there directing traffic. Ease of access by either air or by vehicle was number 2, which was 16 or 12%. And then the condition of the airport facilities and safety was about 9% on that. The next question was, what category of tenant describes you? We thought this was an important question because different entities have different needs, wants, and desires. Majority of people that responded were city hangar tenants. That included outside hangar, closed hangars, anybody that rented was about 61%. The outside tenants were 7, condo owners, tenants were about 25%, visiting pilots was just less than 2, and customers that come onto the airport to visit aviation businesses on the airport was 4. So we kind of wanted to get an idea of who our clients were. The next one was, how far away do you live from the Auburn Airport? We know that we don't just serve the city limits of Auburn. We know that we capture a region. We had between 0 and 5 miles, we had 16% of our populations within 5 miles. So we pretty much think that's within the city limits of Auburn. Between 6 and 10 miles are 47%, and 15 or more miles is 36. What that tells us is we're bringing in a lot of economic value from outside the city limits. Then I thought, and that which brought then another question later on, but my next question was, is how do you rate your overall satisfaction with the airport? Again, 5 being the top, 0 being very dissatisfied. You can see on there we had less than 1% very dissatisfied, 5% dissatisfied, neutral 11, satisfied 53, almost 54, very satisfied 29 for an overall score of 4. So we felt pretty good on that. Then rate the appearance of the airport. Very dissatisfied 1. Dissatisfied 3, actually, yeah, 3%, neutral about 15%, satisfied 54, very satisfied 26.5 for, again, overall score of 4. Then this was a question I came up with when we started talking about how far away from the airport, is how frequently do you use the airport, okay? And we found that it was kind of even all the way through. 1 or 2 times a month was 31, almost 32%. 3 to 4 times a month, 33%. 5 or more times a month, 35. So we have a lot of people coming into the airport from distances quite often. So that means to me, and what our industry as aviation is that we do bring economic value from the airport to the general community. So they go to Lowe's, they buy gas, they go to the grocery store, they stop by Fred Meyer, they do all sorts of things. So just to enhance the viability of the airport. Okay. Next question we had is how frequently do you purchase fuel at the airport? We had a number that do not purchase fuel at the airport. When I started looking into that, that's about, looks like 18%. Some people use auto gas. There's what's called a supplemental type data that planes can be converted so that they can use automotive fuel instead of the more expensive aviation fuel. Others said that they were out and about and would buy fuel anyway. Others said we just shop for the lowest price and we go there. So others, about 50% say 1 to 2 times per month, 3 to 4 times a month, 23%, 5 or more times, about 8%. Then, of course, we had to ask how we were doing as airport staff. And that one came out. Less than 1%, very dissatisfied. Dissatisfied, less than 1%. Neutral, 13. Satisfied, 35. Very satisfied, 55%, for an overall score of 4.35. So we felt pretty good about that. We can't be perfect, although we tried. Okay. Next question, would you recommend the airport to a friend? And those numbers came out to be 96.69, or 117 respondents said they would. 3%, 3.31, or 4 people said no, they would not.
Any questions? Margot, council member.
I just would like to have a little bee in your bonnet over the next couple of years and see, continue to look at the idea of having airport staff there on Sundays. And we're really experts at, since 17, that we had it 6 days a week and there on Sundays.
Yeah, we're only there 5 days.
Oh, 5 days.
We used to be there 6 days, but then
That's
5 years ago, we went down to 5.
Okay.
That's when John took over.
No, I didn't take over, council member. I joined at that. I think it was coincidental.
Semantics, you know.
No, Jamel, you guys and staff do a great job out there, and we appreciate it.
Well, thanks, we enjoy it, and hopefully most of the customers do
I
too.
think they do. Yeah, there's 2 curmudgeons, so.
So a couple of thoughts, if I could. This also is an outcome of the strategic business plan that council adopted, so this is something that's done annually. This is the first time using SurveyMonkey, so pretty good tool for us to use, and we'll be looking to use that in the future. This information will feed into the competitive market assessment and long-term rate study project that we talked about earlier, and that you and the board will be meeting on in a few weeks in a joint meeting with the consultant team to discuss. And the other thing is that those negative responses, we expect those. As a service business, we're not always going to make everyone happy. We have a pretty good track record. Jamel and his team do a great job of providing great customer service, but sometimes we do have to say no, or you can't do that, and that may not always make people happy. But I think, as Jamel pointed out, we have a pretty good record of customer service. So we appreciate Jamel's efforts to do that on the behalf of the city.
As a business operator, those are great scores.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now go to the cemetery update.
Thank you, Council, for letting us come back and do our, it seems like semi-annually, we come back and talk about our Mountain View Cemetery, the largest municipal cemetery in the state of Washington. I'm joined with Craig Hudson, who many of you know, who manages the cemetery for us. And it's really a great asset that we have in our city. And we've got some numbers to share with you tonight, and we're going to kick it off with just a few quick photos. So those of you who haven't had a chance to visit the cemetery recently can kind of see what we're dealing with. If I can figure out how to make this work on here. So Craig can kind of add some insight as to areas that we've improved over the past few years, such as the entrance here.
Yeah, so we've really, and this is on our website here, but we've kind of gone over some, we're picture heavy because we think the cemetery speaks for itself. And so this is an entrance, the main entrance into the cemetery. And a few years back we put in a nice water feature and put some benches in there so that people could, if they needed to, step out and have a cigarette or just contemplate. So it's just been a wonderful asset to the cemetery. It draws people in.
I think we added that about 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a little bit, I think about 5. This is another columbarium. It's called Centennial Columbarium. We've really tried to give people options. And this is a cremation area. We've got a cremation garden in this area, and then these are columbariums or niches for above ground urn options that we have. This is another cremation area. This is called Forest Walk. This is kind of a less traditional urn garden that we implemented. The first phase was done back in 2006, and this has been a very popular area. It's kind of meandering paths through Northwest plantings, and it's really resonated with Northwest clientele. We've got more unique memorialization, bird baths and polished boulders, more unique memorialization, as I said. So
it's the same area.
Same area. The wishing well back there, we've got a scattering option there. It's an ossuary, so the actual cremated remains or ashes are captured, but it's a low-cost option for families also there in that beautiful area. And then we've got big granite tablets where people can put their names and dates. And that's been popular for people that maybe have wanted to scatter their ashes or cremated remains, Puget Sound or Mount Rainier, and it gives people a place to come and just reflect.
Yeah, this area was all done with our internal maintenance staff, and they do a great job of keeping our costs down on construction, and a lot of skilled people up there. Obviously our big sell is the view of Mount Rainier.
This is a children's area here. An overall map of the cemetery.
That's the other entrance.
Veterans section. This is called the Chapel of Memories. We finished this project in 2007. We've got indoor glass front niches, which has been nice because you can put pictures and keepsakes and things in there. Really captures someone's life. And then we've actually been using that for small memorial services also, especially during the winter. Keeps people out of the rain. And then we've got niches on the outside also, outdoor niches.
And back to the start. So we just wanted to show you a few of those, and I just think it's a nice tour of the cemetery. It's a really beautiful site. The crew does a great job maintaining on kind of a wet site, dry site. Irrigation's always an issue, and some of the irrigation isn't completely up to date, so there's some issues with that. One of the things that we're lucky with when we look at this map is the grounds that we have, and in the last 10 years we've purchased these 2 other areas. Craig, What are their sizes and capacities?
So the ones that are outlined there are 5-acre parcels. We're almost 50 acres developed, and so we definitely have future expansion that we can do. On an acre of property, you can do approximately, depending on how you would develop that with landscaping and features, about 1,200 full 4x8 traditional burial sites on an acre of property. So last year we did about 264 placements, both traditional burial and including urns also. We're about 55% traditional burial versus about 45% cremation.
So we have approximately 50 years, I think, or a little 50 plus of capacity left available. That's the reason we purchased those two areas, and we continue using our master plan to look at other areas that are still developable on the site. We'll show you one of those in a minute. This property here is held by a single owner, and it's one that we're going to want to consider in years to come to take care of the generation after the next generation, etc. It's a great these parcels are now being developed with houses, but we are sitting on these two great parcels now that are have great Mount Rainier views as well and have a nice flow to the property. So this is a parcel that staff completed this year, if you want to.
Yeah, so this is called Memory Heights. This is about a half-acre parcel.
Located right here.
Right. And this was kind of a staging area that we'd had storing outer burial containers and excess grave dirt. And we just needed an area, aside from the recent expansion into that 9th edition, and it gave us 593 new plots, and so that's been a real popular area. That's looking off into Kent, and as you get over closer to the fence, you can get some really nice views of Cascades and Mount Rainier also.
So we were here 5 years ago, kind of at the end of the recession, and it was tough times in lots of industries, and you wouldn't think that cemeteries would have much of a recession, but the truth is they do as well, because people aren't purchasing pre-need when you're trying to pay your water bill or whatever you're trying to do. And so there was a decline there, but with some great work with the council and changing some of our fees and charges, our endowed care policy, and with a better economy, we've been able to make some great strides over the last 5 years. So when you look at this, and when you see the blue line taller than the gray line, that's a good sign. Each year we're somewhere, around $100,000 to the positive. Each of the last, that's a 6-year chart there. This year's the same. This year's numbers aren't completely in yet, but we had another really solid year. Our revenues are between sales, burials, and items for resale when we're selling various items. Yeah.
Headstones.
So that's kind of where we're at regarding our annual revenues versus expenditures. That gives us an increase every year in working capital. It's operated as an enterprise. There's no general fund use. In fact, we pay shared costs back to the city for payroll services and other services, IT services, etc. So you can see how back in 2012 our working capital actually had sunk below $200,000 at the time. We were even putting $200,000 a year in the budget in case we needed it to help bail the cemetery out. Those days are long past, although that money still be there, but we obviously don't need it. So we've gone from just less than $200,000 in working capital in 2012 to we're going to be close to $750,000 at the end of this year in working capital. So that's really good news. And it also is kind of corresponding with this next slide, which is our endowed care fund, where when you purchase a plot, 10% goes into endowed care, because at some point the cemetery will be sold out, or we can use it for projects at the cemetery that are ongoing with maintenance and operations, which is where we draw our funds to typically do projects like this last edition we just did. And so there's, I think we're close to, what, 1.75 million? Or 700,000, I mean. Endowed care, it'll probably be 1.8 million at the end of the year in that fund. Craig can talk about a couple of the projects that we do. We haven't programmed them into our capital budget yet, but there's two primary ones that we're really going to have to look at in the next few years. And this is one of them.
Yeah, one is an overlay or seal coat to our existing paved roads in the cemetery. And we got a bid of about close to $300,000, and we'll probably need to do that in probably 3 or 4 phases, so it won't impact the...
Many of those lower roads were built probably 75 years ago now, and they've alligatored and potholed, and we've been repairing them. There's water and irrigation issues. Some of them are slightly newer through the middle section, but as you can imagine, as we talked about roads as a city issue, at a much more minor issue, it's definitely an emphasis at the cemetery, and for sure that main route that most people drive on Veterans Day and other Memorial Days definitely needs an asphalt overlay or a sealing of some kind. And so that's kind of, we just got a couple of estimates back on that, and one we'll probably program into maybe into 2 years or into 3 years in the budget.
Councilmember Wales.
How much mileage is that? I mean, are we talking a mile, 5 miles?
Like how, when we added all the paths up?
Boy, I'd have to
Just
go back
guess,
and look at
I'll
my
never know
notes.
the difference.
I would say probably a little over a mile of roads in there.
And the gentleman that went out to assess it, we also had one of our M&O staff go out. They kind of gave us, well, this section needs to be overlaid, this section needs to be chip sealed, this one's, so we kind of got it wasn't like a 1-inch lift on the whole thing. Obviously, our traffic count here is nothing like a municipal road, but it should look good. I mean, it's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And not be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Another project that we've had council and I think some citizens talk about is a mausoleum building. The one that we have there now is sold out, and Craig can kind of speak to that.
Yeah, so the existing mausoleum has pretty much been sold out since I got there in 2006. We've had some people sell back their crypts, but that building was built in 1974, and it seems like each year we get more and more people asking about above ground, placement, and so we've been working with Wilbert Precast, who designed our Chapel of Memories, and so we're kind of in that initial stage of looking at costs and viability of doing something like that.
So this would be open, it would be covered, but open air in the middle, as you can kind of see in this diagram, and feature about 96 crypts is kind of the size they recommend. It'd be similar in size to the building located next to it, which is that Chapel of Memories. And half would be loaded from the inside, half outside, or all inside?
No, all inside.
It's all inside, loaded. It'd be a nice covered area and a little gathering space as well. The issue is on it, you can see that the cost is $350,000 to $400,000 and your return is $750,000. That sounds really good, but if you're only getting 3 or 4 requests a year and it takes 30 years to fill, is that return on investment that good? So that's kind of what we're weighing now, is how many asks does the cemetery get?
Councilmember Wales.
I've gotten a number of concerns and requests, and if you are doing 264 placements a year, and almost half of them are above ground, they aren't. It's not 46 to 50.
Above ground, but some are
In
urns.
urns.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what percentage would be your need for this kind of a placement in an open air?
Yeah, I'd say we'd probably get 5 or 6 questions, but if we had an option like that, then obviously we'd be showing that, and so.
So it's not as great, yeah, okay.
Yeah, if you got 5 sales a year, that would probably work out well. And if you owned it, you'd get more questions. That's a good point. Something we should really look at. It's tough to say we have all these options, but the one you want, you don't. So I think there's a good point there.
Okay, thank you.
The real thing that makes it work is that group of people there. When we had to downsize about 6-7 years ago, we lost one of our maintenance workers, and this group is just still doing outstanding work. Craig can speak to that crew. I never get complaints about the work ethic and the customer service of the people that are out there odd hours and really hard, difficult family times doing the work at the cemetery, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, you can't just have anybody working out in the cemetery, and I am fortunate to have a staff that really cares, and it definitely shows out there, so real proud of the guys out there.
And gal.
And gal.
Emer actually holds it all together.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Could you go over that wishing well again?
Yeah, so that's it's an ossuary, so it captures the ashes, so it's not like there's a scattering garden where the ashes just go to the wind, but they're captured, and it's just a low-cost option. I think with the engraving on the memorial tablet, I think it's $765 for that.
And how many tablets are there?
There's 2 out there. Well, actually, we have 3, but 2 in that forest walk.
But how
Urn
many
garden.
will fill that one wishing well?
Well, we'll add more. The capacity to the ossuaries, I think it's 500-gallon tank that was placed in the ground out there. Yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So now we're going to talk about multimedia and communications. Do you want to take a break? All right. We'll be back at 7:12. 6 minutes.
Your business.
year-end review
Yes.
by the infamous Director of Administration.
Wow, thank you, Councilmember Pelosa. Yeah, so I heard a rumor that an update on multimedia and all of our services was requested, so I thought I would just give you kind of a grand overview of the division and what we do. And we're essentially the public outreach arm of the city when it comes to communications and PR and marketing and emergency communications and all of those sorts of things. So we do kind of 5 essential things. Video services. The man behind the mirror back there, Jason Jones, has overseen that for, gosh, 14 years, I think. Probably our longest serving employee in the Multimedia and Communications Division. Sarah St. George is our graphic designer, so she oversees you know, all of the pretty pictures, if you will, whether it comes from logo design or desktop publishing, designing a brochure, a flyer, graphics for the website, all of those things typically come off of her desk. Bridget Dosey is our webmaster, so she oversees all of our web services, our main website, as well as several of the subsites that we manage for the golf course, and the cemetery also has a separate website. We also have an internal intranet website for employee use that she oversees, as well as our web services like our electronic broadcast email system. We of course spend a lot of time working with Paul in IT and his staff with a lot of our web-based services. Our most recent effort on the open data platform and gathering our data and telling stories to the public with our data to illustrate how much work we do on a daily basis, which is voluminous and quite high quality. And Kaylin Brady is our communications coordinator. So when it comes to all of those from the magazine to press releases to media relations to emergency communications as a public information officer, spokesperson for the city, all of those things will come from Kaylin. And we do have one part-time employee, that's Karen Lotta, and she oversees our mail services and our print services. So the first table that I provided you was just our multimedia request overview for 2017. You can see there that we did just over 1,650 work requests this year from all of our different departments. And those things, again, would entail a request from our staff on any number of things, whether it's something they want placed on the website or some sort of graphic design need, a video or photographic service, and print services, all of those things. You can see the breakdown there by department. Daryl's department is our largest and most valued customer in multimedia. They do a lot, and they want to tell people stuff a lot, and so we help them do that through our services in multimedia. And our mail services there, it's kind of interesting. Yes, we still do use traditional mail. It is effective, it is needed, and we mailed out, with this graph, about 522,000 mail pieces in 2017. And we'll do that either through first class mail, that will be an internal service, or our bulk mail service, which is how we mail out a significant number of the pieces to our citizens through our bulk mail service. What's not captured here is our package service, which is FedEx, UPS, ground services there. And, you know, we work a lot with the city clerks there when passports is a big one coming out of them, and that division oversees all of the outgoing mail. And then the next page provided is really just kind of an overview, just a brief overview of what all of the different divisions do, whether it's design and print services, video production services. You all know we manage a government access television channel. We also have our branded YouTube channel that we have used heavily over quite the last few years especially. We've really increased the use of YouTube here at the city. And again, just a overview of the different things that go on with the print and mail services. And our biggest venture, I would say, as far as how much outreach we do in digital media is through our website and through the use of social media. And we just kind of have a comparative chart there. We jumped into the social media world as a government entity back in 2009. And you can see there we started with about 6 pages and a Twitter account and a YouTube channel. And we have expanded that to quite a lot of Facebook pages. We have actually 2 Twitter accounts now. The police department has their own Twitter account as well, and they are at about 1,600 followers at this point. You can see on social media that the police department, again, appears to be the most popular Facebook page. Those of us that run and oversee Facebook pages are extremely jealous of their audience and the engagement that they have on that platform, something that in probably the last 2 years they have just really opened up. It's become a fantastic communication channel for our police department. They do a great job over there. And then our tourism site and our Auburn Arts and Events Facebook pages are very popular there, topping the 10,000 follower mark, and other various pages that will change kind of throughout. If a page appears to not be effective or staff really just doesn't have the time to manage it as we would like, we may close those down and open new ones. So you can see at the bottom there, we have probably about 6 new social media platforms that we're using now here at the city. And that is something that we oversee. We allow the departments typically have what we call a content matter expert to oversee those pages. And if a department or a division, or in some cases an event like Pet Palooza is the only page that is specific to an event here at the city, people really do appear to love their animals here here in Auburn, and they do a great job on that side as well. But typically there will be anywhere from 2 to 3 different administrators within that department on a social media site that's being used, and we will provide a little bit of oversight and a little bit of training for those that aren't familiar with the use of the platform or how to most effectively use the platform. Our division will supply that training and oversight on those sites.
Questions? Gee.
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
And the only thing I will add is that we are in the middle of a website redesign. We're probably about a third of the way into the process, so as we continue down that path, we'll be sharing more information with you all on how that redesign is happening.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Good, you're welcome.
Okay. Sister cities.
Good evening, Doug Weem, Administration Economic Development.
And I'm Dewana Richards, Community Programs Coordinator and Sister City Liaison for the City of Auburn. So we were asked to just kind of bring you up to date on what's been happening with our Sister Cities program. And I could give you a long version, but we're going to give you the short version tonight. So if there's something that hasn't been covered, just be sure and ask questions. We have currently 4 different countries that we have sister cities in. The longest one has been with Tamba, Japan. We will be celebrating our 50-year anniversary for that relationship coming up this summer. And then the next one that was developed was Pyeongchang, South Korea. And that was developed started about 2008, I think 2010. The relationship was actually formalized. And then we have a couple friendship cities in China, Guanghan and Yuhang. Guanghan is really close to Chengdu, and then about 3 hours away, Yuhang is very close to Hangzhou. And I'll explain a little bit later as to why we have the friendship cities there. And then last but certainly not least is Mola de Bari, Italy, which is one of our newest sister cities. For the next page, I was asked to give you a little bit of background on our Youth Ambassador Program. And this is probably the main engine that really runs our sister city program. This is where we give kids who are attending our schools in Auburn or live in Auburn or who have parents who work in Auburn an opportunity to serve as a youth ambassador and actually go over to one of the countries we have a sister city relationship with. The last several years, that has been between us and Tamba, Japan. Auburn and Kent now share the sister city of Tamba. That happened when Japan made some changes with their government. Several years ago, they started consolidating their government. And so as a result, our sister cities, that were two little cities, were absorbed into the new larger city of Tamba. And so we have had a really good partnership, and they had the Youth Ambassador Program that had been going for several years. In fact, it will be 25 years since their Youth Ambassador Program was started. And an interesting point is that the new mayor of Kent, Dana Rolfe, actually went as a youth ambassador to Kaibara when she was a high school student. And then her son went just a few years later back again. So, you know, it's been a long-standing program, very, very successful. Students who are going into 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th grade can apply to become a youth ambassador for the summer program. And we accept up to 10 students maximum per summer. We don't have 10 that apply every year, and so the number, you know, changes from year to year. But that's kind of the range that we go, is from 2 to 10 students a year that will go over as a youth ambassador. It's primarily, like I said, been between Auburn, Kent, Tamba, and but we are now opening up to our other sister city areas as well this year. Our China Sister City Committee is very anxious to start a similar program. We've been having students coming over from middle schools there for several years now, and so now they would like to make it available for students from here to be able to go over and have a similar experience. How it works is literally the students are trading homes. Our students from Kent and Auburn will go over there in July. They spend about 10 days or so staying in the home of the youth ambassador that was selected in Tamba to be a youth ambassador. So we do profiles of the students, try to match them as closely as possible in terms of interests, definitely in terms of sex. If it's a girl, she goes to a girl's home. If it's a boy, he goes to a boy's home, and that type of thing. And then after our students come back, they're home for about a week, and then the students from Tamba come here, and they'll stay in their home. So it's a true exchange-to-exchange program. We've been doing the summer program for several years, ever since we combined with Kent. We just recently reinstated the year-long Youth Ambassador Program. And this is where one student is selected each year to go over and attend school at Kaibara High School. And then they select a student from there to come and attend school in one of our high schools. Auburn, our first young man who attended Auburn High School, was here just a couple years ago, made a big impact on baseball to the point where he had all his team members bowing as they would enter the field. It's been a really, really good program. Our next year's year-long ambassador is a young lady who attended Auburn Riverside, and she is really excited about having the opportunity to go back. One of the things is that in order to qualify for the year-long program, they have to have participated in the summer program first. It gives us a chance to see how they do. It gives them a chance to determine if this is something that really fits for them or not. Most of the students who apply for this program have had some sort of Japanese. We have really strong Japanese programs both at Auburn Mountain View and at Auburn Riverside. Used to at Auburn High School, but of course with the retiring of their Japanese teacher, they decided to implement Chinese, which is why we now have such an interest in kids going to China. But it is not a requirement that they have Japanese, and we have had some students go over that have not really had formal classwork in Japanese. In order to the year-long program, they do have to they're tested, and they have to have passed that test at a certain level of competency in order to go over for the year-long. So, let's see, I think that's the main thing about the Youth Ambassador Program. Once again, it's a true exchange-to-exchange program, which is why the school districts are okay with it, because the student who would have been attending their school is over in Japan, so the student from Japan is just taking that student's place. Just a quick overview of some of the exchanges that happened this last year in 2017 to let you know kind of how active this program is. In January, we had several students come from South Korea from middle school and visited here. A lot of these schools have sister school relationships, and I did want to mention that currently the president of our Auburn Sister City Association is Ryan Foster. He's the associate superintendent for the Auburn School District. So the Auburn School District is very, very involved in this program. And it's just growing because they have more and more schools that are developing sister school relationships. In April, we actually had a delegation from Auburn that went over for the first time that they had visited Guanghan and Yuhang, China, and met with the city governments there, and then visited several of the sister schools. And Ryan Foster was part of that. Ray Vefik from the Auburn School Board was part of that delegation that went over there. One of the things I wanted to mention quickly as to why we have the Friendship City in China in particular. In China, with their government, when they apply for a visa to come here, in order to do that, there needs to have been some sort of formal agreement or relationship. It cuts through a lot of red tape for them in order to get the students to come over here and visit. So that is why generally we would have just one city be a sister city in a country, but we were requested by Yuhang because they already had sister school relationships established here in Auburn, and in order to come and visit, their sister school, it just made it easier when we formalized a Friendship City agreement there. It really doesn't cost us, anything to go ahead and just have a formal agreement. So that's why we did that. And we do have Rainier Middle School, Mount Baker Middle School, and then a private school in Auburn are all sister schools with schools in China. So then after the April visit in July, we actually had 3 separate groups of students come from Yuhang, China. They usually come, they stay with host homes here. They're usually here for about 2 to 3 weeks, visiting all around the Puget Sound area. And then they actually spend some time in classroom learning their English better, which is one of their main reasons for coming. In August, we had the group from Tamba came and visited, and it was fun because they were able to participate in the Auburn Day Parade, which really was a highlight for them. And then in November, you will probably all recall that we had a large delegation come from Tamba, adults, not the students this time. It had been a long time since we had had a group of adults come, and they were here primarily to look into business opportunities, which Doug will talk about a little bit more in just a little bit. And then November, let's see, yes, that was when that delegation came. And then December was the last delegation, and they came from Green River College. Students came. We have the relationship with Bonhan as a result of Green River's request. There are several students who are attending the aviation-related courses there, and so we had Choo-Choo came over from China and brought several of the students here to visit City Hall, because this is their City Hall during the 2 to 3 years that they are living here in our community. So with that, Doug.
Okay. So I wanted to highlight a couple of business-related involvements that we had through Sister Cities connections. Actually, this first one I wanted to highlight really didn't come through Sister Cities. It was a invitation request from the Lieutenant Governor's office that came in September. They requested Auburn's participation in a trade mission that he was heading up that was going to go into South Korea. And it was strictly for a business-related scenario. And so part of what brought us kind of to the surface on his request is that he was going to be visiting Pyeongchang, our sister city, and that's kind of what prompted them asking us for our involvement and help with it. So we put it out to the local business community. They gave us less than 30 days to really put it out, and we ended up with 4 business people from Auburn that decided that they wanted to participate. We had Cascade Helicopters from the airport, we had Pacific Raceways, we had Auburn Wine. So we had 4 business people from town that wanted to participate. They all made application. We were able to get them grants from the Department of Commerce to offset a good share, a percentage of their cost of going on the trip. And so we were there for, I believe, 8 days. All of them had a number of business meetings set up for them through the U.S. Embassy and a number of other ways that we did it through the Korean American Chamber of Commerce here in the state of Washington that helped with it also. We helped host and organize a reception that was put on at the U.S. Embassy. We had almost 100 Korean companies there. And there were a number of good connections made. We've already had a number of the businesses that went along or still have business relationships and meetings ongoing right now that are quite positive movements for them. I know Auburn Wine has already has a relationship established through Japan, actually, through Tumba, but is going to have an impact back in Korea. There's actually a winemaker in Tumba, or in Pyeongchang, that's actually gotten involved with them. So it's been interesting to watch those relationships happen. Cascade Helicopters has already gotten work through the U.S. military, through a connection that was made at the Army base there in Seoul on some engine repair work. And we met with the city of Pyeongchang when we were there in advance of the Olympics. You did the proclamation last week for them, so we were doing some pre-setup work with them that they wanted to have done. So it was a very prosperous trip. The businesses that went along felt it was very positive, and it looks like it's going to have an impact. The lower right corner photo, I put that in there because I wanted, you have no clue, you wouldn't know what it is. That is a disc brake for an aircraft made by a startup tech company in Yuhang, and they were looking for a connection here in the United States. The brake pads are actually made from reused composite material, and they're going through the international patent process on it right now. We introduced them to a couple of companies here in the Auburn area that are looking at it. What's unique about where these kids were is they were in an incubator accelerator program over there. Yuhang is the home headquarters for Alibaba. Yeah. Alibaba is probably 4 to 5 times larger than Amazon. And so while we were there, we were actually able to meet with some of the Alibaba executives at their campus got a tour of their incubator, met a number of these kids, and startup companies are there. So we made some really good, interesting connections with them, because some of the startups that are there in that incubator are actually wanting to come to the U.S. market. So there's an interesting way that maybe some startup companies could be actually transferred from there over to here. And they actually bring technology with them, which would mean U.S. jobs. So it was an interesting connection that was made through the city of Yuhang. Then in November, we did have a business visit from Tumba with the business owners. And I'll take credit for the lack of the B in the Tumba name up there when I typed it, and you wanted it in case she proved me, so I'll take the hit on that one. The group that came in from Tumba that was here was predominantly interested in tourism and in hospitality, the group that came over. So there were 2 city officials from the city of Tumba, and then the rest were all business people from the city regional area around Tumba. And so what they were interested in is how does restaurant startups, particularly barbecue, and so there were connections made through local suppliers for equipment, consulting services with one local company that has made themselves available to them, and then particularly spirits. That seemed to be the real interest that they had. So they did a number of visits with local wineries right here in Auburn, Blackfish Distillery, Schillings, Go Boom. We took them out to wherever they wanted to see when they were here, and made a number of good business connections. I know, again, Jim is working directly with them. Jim Wilson now is, since he's gotten himself out of the retail end of food and beverage, he's really into the wholesale end. And from a trip 3 years ago, Jim got involved in getting his actual import-export licensing completed with the U.S. government, and that's been completed. So he's fully licensed now and capable of exporting container loads of Washington wine and other distilled spirits out of the country, and importing then also sake from Japan, from the one sake brewery that we have a connection with over in Tumba. So it was a very prosperous trip. They were here a short amount of time, but they made a number of local business connections, and now it's up to the private sector really to do something with it, but we've done connection making with them. So those are a couple of highlights this year on economic development's involvement with sister cities and foreign relations.
And we did receive a letter from the new mayor of Tumba, and he was commenting on the fact that the gentleman who was here looking at the barbecue is going to be opening a barbecue restaurant, and also the fact that, he was excited that we now will have the wine. They will be getting Washington wine, we'll be getting the sake here. So anyway, he's very, very pleased with the direction that he sees things going in terms of data. Just real quick overview of kind of what's on the agenda for 2018 for us. We already had our group of South Korean middle school students visit again. They were just here last Friday visiting City Hall. They're actually currently here in Auburn, staying with various host families. Each of these students, by the way, usually spends from $300 to $500 when they're here just for the short term. And the students who live up in Green River are spending on average of about $30,000 a year here that they bring into the Auburn community. So that's just something that's good to know. February, an Auburn delegation will be going to the Winter Olympics opening ceremony. The folks from Pyeongchang, the mayor of Pyeongchang, personally invited a group. So it will consist of some of the folks from the Korean Sister City Committee, and some folks from here that will be going to that. Summer of 2018, we will have 3 to 4 groups of middle school students visiting again from Yuhang. And then in August 2018, I mentioned 50-year anniversary. The new mayor of Tumba is planning to come and celebrate that 50-year anniversary with us and with Kent, and we will be signing a formal 3-way agreement. We have not had a formal three-way sister city agreement signed between Kent, Auburn, and Tamba. And this is when it will happen. So lots of pomp and circumstance. You'll all be hearing more about that later. And he is hoping to have 10 youth ambassadors that he will be bringing with him from Tamba. So we are hoping to reciprocate and have 10 youth ambassadors from Kent and Auburn. In September, we have something that's coming up that's really unique. This came out of the Japan America Society. They have something called the Grassroots Summit that happens every year, and a different city hosts that summit. And one year it's hosted in Japan, the next year it's hosted in the United States. Well, this year, 2018, it is going to be hosted by Seattle for the first time. And so we were approached by the folks who are, on the planning end of this, and they have reached out to those who have sister cities located in Japan and asked if we would be willing to be one of the highlighted cities as an area where folks could sign up and stay with host homes. So I've been working with our tourism coordinator, Lorraine, and she has put together a wonderful little itinerary. They'll be with us for about 3 days, staying in host homes. And so I included in your handouts here some information that Lorraine had put together about that. I would encourage, if any of you are interested in having an interesting experience and hosting, we will be looking for applications. And then I also included an application and a page out of Doing Business in Auburn that talks about our Sister City program for you, because we're always looking for more youth ambassadors as well. So if you know any young people that fit the criteria and might have an interest, please let them know about our program. Does anybody have any questions for us?
How's that trip going to the Olympics going to be? It's going to be pretty expensive.
No, excuse me, it really isn't.
Are they offering the passes to go to some of those games, or
No,
are you folks paying for those?
we've been invited to go to the opening ceremony along with their other 3 sister cities. So Pyeongchang has 4 sister cities from around the world, and so they invited all 4. There's no cost for the event itself. We have our airfare, and they are taking care of our hotel while we're there in Tamba. So it's this, yeah. And so I think it's actually quite reasonable. It's really not.
Is that considered? Is that considered a gift?
Gift?
Yeah.
It's considered a diplomatic thing. One of the things that's important to know is that Pyeongchang was looking for an American sister city. And when we were approached, and the reason why they were looking is because they had attempted to host the Winter Olympics 2 times before and had been turned down. And they were told that it would probably help their chances if they had an American sister city, and developed a closer relationship with someplace in America. So that's what happened. They ended up being awarded the Winter Olympics after that. And, former Mayor Lewis, I know, had brought it to the National League of Cities where it was voted on. And at that time, there were no American cities that were, putting their hat in the ring to host the Winter Olympics. So as a result of that, they were given the Olympics. So in their eyes, the city of Auburn was very instrumental in helping them.
And I believe at that time the council did a resolution in support of it. Where we're going to be sitting, invited the way we have, those tickets don't even have a value placed on them. They don't even sell them. So there is no value. It's a 0. And the airfare was less than $900. So it's really not inexpensive. It would cost you more to go to New York than what this has cost.
Well, you mentioned that the motel is being furnished for you.
One night.
One night, okay, because that, to me, it's a gift, and I thought we were only allowed as a government body, we're only allowed no more than $50 as a gift. And so
They
that
offered to
just-
cover
you
one
just
night's
said that
hotel while we were
was-
there in town. That hasn't been accepted yet. They made the reservation for us, and that's it, because they had control of the rooms. The Olympic Committee controls everything over there. The thing about this trip is that's what's unique is that it solidifies a relationship with Pengcheng and people that will be there that we will meet. There's no way to ever meet those folks. And the relationship building that's coming out of some of these cities is beginning to pay off. That's a world stage. The value of our connection with Pengcheng and just the internet searches that are coming from people that search Pengcheng, find us, is priceless. And so I think that the fact that Tumba has reached out to include us at that level will pay off for us in the future.
Well, I understand that, but I just don't want our city getting in trouble for accepting a gift that's more than.
No, they offered to make the reservation for one night's hotel for us, and that was pretty much it. Like I said, the seating where we'll be, those tickets aren't even available to be sold. So it's a diplomatic seat that has no value to it.
Okay, anything further? Thank you, appreciate it. So now we're gonna get an update on dangerous dog ordinance. Recommendation.
Good evening, members of the council and mayor. Following the presentation that the police gave you last month on the practical issues relating to the dangerous dog ordinances, we in legal were looking at code changes that might be helpful. And we're not done with that. In fact, there were some issues that were raised for council review by a lady who came to council. She raised some issues. Some of those may not be things that we could reasonably or practically put into effect, or at least not without some other things. We're looking at all of the issues that are there, but let me tell you, there are some things that we can do that we are looking at cleaning language up. And if I call them the helpful things, because sometimes when the ordinance was originally adopted, probably 12, 14 years ago, a lot of things changed, including the state statutes that give authority for cities to do certain things. Some of those have changed. They've changed some of the language, and who knows what could happen down the road with the legislature, because it is something that does attract attention. However, every time we make a change, one of the things that inevitably happens is you change it for one purpose, but something else from a practical standpoint comes out, and it might trigger the need for something else to be changed as well. So some of the things that we're looking at doing, and we'll be bringing an ordinance to you hopefully pretty soon, will be providing some consistency and uniformity between the things that relate to the dangerous dog and the potentially dangerous dog. Notice is covered originally by the statutes. It was treated differently. Subsequent changes in the state law make it appropriate for us to make sure that that doesn't create some inconsistencies in what we do. We also feel that there's some value in clarifying and maybe making more uniform or consistent the appeal process, because those two are not treated the same. When the statute was, as the statute read when the city first adopted its dangerous dog ordinance, the statute that empowers cities to take that action read differently than it does now. Now, we want to make sure that we can take what exists now and make sure it doesn't cause any problems for the city in connection with the implementation of the dangerous dog processes. We also want to make sure that we have uniformity in how the determinations are made between the dangerous dog and the potentially dangerous dog, because there are some determinations that are made. Again, mostly because the way they developed and the statutes that existed at the time, they weren't uniform. They didn't used to be uniform, and now we want to make them more uniform because our ordinance would look differently if drafted today than it did 14 years ago when the statutes were different. We also want to get rid of some of the inconsistencies or potential ambiguities regarding when a fence is required, or what is a fence, or what is secured within a home. And part of the reason for that is, I'll give you an example. One of the things that comes to our mind when we're looking at the language and what it could mean is if a dog is secured, deemed secured merely because it is in a home where the dog might reside, then that would suggest that maybe the dog could attack with impunity anybody that came inside the house. So that's something we also want to make sure we don't leave ourselves in a quandary because of that. And timelines for confiscation or treatment of abandoned animals is inconsistent currently between what it is for an abandoned animal and what it is for a dangerous dog that might be impounded. And we need to make sure that we don't leave any holes or questions in terms of how the process works, even though sometimes it's going to be under a normal abandoned dog or a dog that gets impounded for whatever reason, and a dangerous dog. We don't want the inconsistencies between those two processes to create problems for us in terms of what we do. Other things are just making sure that we address some statutory language issues that might come into play. And RCW 1652-085 gives law enforcement and code enforcement and animal control officers the opportunity to take certain action when they deem an emergency situation existing. And for instance, you might otherwise need a warrant, but you don't need a warrant if an emergency exists, but we don't define emergency. So that's one of the areas where we're just going to try to make sure that we plug in some language to help us not have to stumble or hesitate in connection with what we need to do or what we want to have done. One of the issues that suggestions, we took suggestions from all the sources that deal with this, including the police, including code enforcement, animal control, and legal. And one of the things that I want to make sure we do cover, because it was raised by our assistant chief, who said, can we make it somebody else have to do this? Somebody else has to hear the original appeal. Yeah, we could do that. But it doesn't have to be in the code, because the language to do that already exists. The one thing that I wouldn't want to leave us in uncertainty with respect to is we cannot use the same person to make the original appeal and the subsequent appeal. There's two separate appeals, and they need to be two separate things. And part of the reason for that is because there's also the opportunity for reconsideration. You can ask whomsoever made the decision to reconsider if you qualify for that, if you raise issues that are related to that. So we are working on all these. We're vetting all of the things that the language we have to make sure it works well with the police, works well with the animal control, and works consistently with the state statutes that empower cities to take that action. We are, again, looking at other things that were suggested that may or may not work, but we'll be bringing those to you, and those will be some issues that you'll be wanting to talk about. We're going to give you the language that we've come up with for our suggestions how to get around this, but there are some choices. And I don't have the language done. We're still working on it. And it's something that's involved a lot of time from my staff as we worked through those things. We had several meetings on this internally, just within our department, and we'll be bringing those things to you pretty soon for you to look at. And I know you'll have a lot of questions. We'll probably commandeer the assistant chief or the chief to get over here too to answer some of the practical questions as we get through the language.
Well, I suggest that, make sure you give us a red line bouncing off the.
We absolutely will do that.
Yeah, when you get there.
Yeah, but we will do that because these are ordinances and we want to show how the changes are made.
Absolutely. Councilmember Wales.
Have we got our animal control officers yet?
I think we do.
Started today.
Yeah, we just hired one today, started, and we're still in the searching phase for the second animal control.
And when we have,
Yes, go ahead.
when we have two, will they have a staggered schedule so that we have 7 day a week?
That's the plan.
Okay, great. And how you get them is calling 911? Okay. Another question is, I'd like a definition to include what a serious injury is.
And we are going to get you that.
Because it, my neighbor just got bit. And, you know, there's a bite and a nibble and a lick with one tooth. You know, I'm not sure, but she really got bit. And we couldn't get anything done.
That was one of the issues that we said, some inconsistencies, not inconsistencies, some things would benefit from clarity, and that's what we're trying to plug in.
You know, it'd be also nice that if you're bit, that the owner provides you with some verification of having a rabies shot, so you know what kind of treatment you may have to have while you're pending how this thing is going to work out.
And we are actually,
Great.
we are looking at language that deals
Okay.
with that. Not only that, but also we want to make sure that we know we can respond so that, for instance, does an appeal lift the responsibilities of a court order or the hearing examiner's ordered sanctions? And we want to make sure that that is also covered too, because that could leave people up in the air in terms of that as well.
Anything further? Any further questions? Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe we have other discussion items or new business unless anyone has something to really open up here. So we'll move to item 7, which is the matrix. And for those items that we have on the matrix right now, we have several TBDs, and I would ask in the beginning if we could put some dates on some of these TBDs. So I guess the first one would fall to Councilmember DeCoursey to take a look at those 4 items at the top of the matrix.
Well, we're scheduled for February 26th for that focus area. And we'll just touch base with staff and see if that's an overwhelming number of things to present that evening, or if we can go ahead and do that with a reasonable time limit.
Okay. Chair Pelosi.
Yes. So we remove 5, 6, and 7.
Right.
And item 8 then would go to, I would recommend March 12th. I believe that we've slid that out from an earlier date, but March 12th should work. Oh, and then you had some ads.
A couple. When
Yeah.
we get to that point.
We're there.
Okay, I don't know what, where emergency management, the role of emergency management would go, if that would go under municipal services, or, I know it wouldn't go under finance, but.
I would think muni services.
Okay.
Emergency planning shows up under municipal
emergency
services.
planning.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
on, yeah.
I'd like to see the role of emergency management and its relationship to our recent fire.
So we have an update on the fire coming at, let's see, the next
Council meeting, I
the
believe.
next council meeting, a presentation at the beginning of the council meeting that will include police, Valley Regional Fire Authority, community development, public works, and I believe emergency management is already. And economic development as
And
part of
that's
that
going to be
presentation.
at our next week.
Council
Regular
meeting,
council
yes.
meeting, yeah.
And then, you know, then we can see what falls out of
Yeah.
that. I mean, you may
Excellent.
want to add it back on.
Yeah.
Didn't you have something else?
Yes, under, I'd like to put in there as a marker, but not with the date, the airport facilities assessment report. And even though I know we're going to be doing budget, I'd still like to hear their capital needs report, some of their ideas outside of the budget process. And then I believe Yolanda and I are meeting with Dana, and we're going to go through some items that we want to, you know, reconcile with Dana and her department plans to have included on here with more specific dates that work with, you know, their workloads.
Subject matter workloads?
No, the subject matter has to do with the homeless count for the last 5 years, the veterans levy, veterans levy, best starts for kids, an update on the 2018 goals for the Blue Ribbon and some of those, but we'd like to brainstorm that first with Dana so that she can tell us what's already in the make and, you know, kind of.
Now, these are in addition to the ones that are already listed?
Yes, yes, so it will come with more later after we work with staff.
And we're already meeting with her on Thursday.
Thursday,
Yeah.
right.
So we needed to confirm the time, because I noticed that it was changed.
It's 3 o'clock?
So I think it's
Still
Wednesday.
Wednesday? Wait a minute.
I have Wednesday at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock? Okay. That's all I have.
I don't believe we have Shelley here, so maybe perhaps, John, you could get with Shelley and maybe fill in some of these items that are coming up with the budget and what have you.
It's going to be a very busy year on budget items.
Okay.
So I have
Okay, go ahead.
I received a phone call from National League of Cities dealing with the service line program. And we've all heard about that. And the representative would like to come out and give a presentation at a study session. He has done this at other cities, at their workshops, et cetera. You know, and I'm talking like 20 minutes, something like that.
So this is what you had discussion on previously, and Kevin, I don't know if you have any of the details, Ingrid isn't here, but there was guidance from council when this came through before, that if the city of Auburn had to be listed on that agreement, that council was not interested in having that take place.
I don't remember us talking about that part of it.
Yeah.
That was a very big part of it.
Well, is that something where we can listen to the presentation and ask them questions about names on the agreement and that kind of a thing? I mean, it's 20 minutes just to be informed.
Do you want to maybe find some of the information, the correspondence that came back
Yeah,
from Ingrid, because it was pretty extensive.
It was, and we will get it back out to the council, and the mayor's correct, the concern was the co-listing of using the city's logo, which gave the appearance that this was a city-sanctioned program and a city-facilitated program, which it was not.
That's probably an issue that many of the other cities have. Maybe, Bill, you could talk to them about that issue.
Well, he would be willing to talk about the cities that they've contracted with. for a similar issue, that's all.
I have an absence of memory here, but I'm not familiar with this topic whatsoever.
We did visit it in one prior study session, but other cities, Mayor Baker in Kenmore, is it? They have it in their city. It's recently, within the last couple of years, been available for Washington State. In the past, it hasn't been.
It was an insurance matter.
It's an insurance matter. What people don't realize is that water and sewer is the responsibility of the city up to their property line. From that water and sewer connection to their house is theirs. Their homeowner's insurance won't cover that. So this is a very specific type of very inexpensive insurance that we may want to make available to our citizens to protect them for what amounts to a couple dollars a month.
Well,
and
I have it under ARP.
Okay.
And this came under ARP before National League of Cities sponsored the program. And so I jumped on it. And it isn't, I think it was $8 a month, something like that. But, so we're already contracted with ARP. We're covered, my house.
Councilmember Wells.
Maybe this is something that we could look at and then at another time have Mayor Baker come down and talk to us about it too. I mean, it's not time
I guess,
sensitive.
yeah, all I'm saying is, I think it's a matter we need to discuss more.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of private solicitors and solicitations going on to the homeowners out there about this. They're trying to sell them the insurance, so.
Dan, do you want to wait? Wasn't there an issue, I mean, that was the perceived liability of the city. That was the issue.
I know, I remember the discussion, but I'll confess to you, I don't recall all the details. I will go back and look at it, and maybe Kevin and I can make sure we get all of the information that was earlier considered. I do remember there was some concerns, and I remember the council sounding pretty unified in terms of if that's what it is, we didn't want to go there. But it's not to say you can't discuss it and go from there.
Any other items to be considered for the matrix? Okay.
Matrix revisited.
Yes. Okay, well, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. Okay. 6 months off.
Mario? Linked with a tooth, I love that.
I can't forget that date.
No.
Take care of that. Well, whatever it is. That ain't developed.
So it's insurance that would guard against anybody's breaking between the street and the faucets inside.
Okay.
There's a quick way to search.
And it's a good deal, but the problem was for them to offer it, they wanted the city logo on what they were offering.
Maybe I'll
Survived your first night?
I'll see you, Bob.
Take care.
Roll call. How are you, sir?
Sergeant, I use the phrase, I'm in a
What's the
quandary.
best time for you?
One of my officers. Me. Quick as a whip, one of my other officers, Frank Chang. Laundry means Austin, a Chinese laundry.
I'm good this week.
Quandary.
What can you say?
So we'll, we were gonna present, it's actually very timely because we wanted to.
Definition ever since, but it's not the proper one.